It's autumn 1016 and the Danish Viking king Cnut has just successfully conquered England. As part of his measures to secure control over the country, the following year he introduces earls and earldoms. 1016 to 1066, the power of the English earls. In early 1017, to help secure his newly conquered kingdom, King Cnut decides to restructure the English administration, dividing the country into 4 parts, each of which will be ruled over by one person. Long story short, he has created earldoms. The earls who are to rule over these new earldoms are directly below the king in terms of authority. Initially, he appoints existing followers of his to 3 of the 4 new earldoms. And Wessex, a very large earldom stretching across the south coast of England, he keeps for himself to rule over directly. However, this doesn't last for very long, and within a year, one of his earls has been killed for treason, and the earldom of Mercia has collapsed into several earldoms. In 1018, Cnut goes for a reshuffle, creating at least 2 earldoms in Wessex and appointing new people as earls. The most notable of these new people to get picked in the reshuffle is Godwin. Godwin is an Englishman, and is rather mysterious in his origins. No one is really sure on what his origins exactly are, or how Cnut comes to favour him so much, but in 1018 he is made an earl, and by 1020, through serving Cnut loyally, he manages to get appointed Earl of Wessex. The number and size of the earldoms is not fixed, but the 4 key earldoms remain the same at the start of Edward the Confessor's reign: Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria, and East-Anglia. The responsibilities and powers of earls, just like their earldoms, are not exactly clearly defined either, but essentially they help with running and governing the country, acting as representatives for the king in the lands that they control. Having an earldom gives earls a lot of opportunity to get very rich, as they are allowed to keep many of the profits from their earldoms. For example, they are allowed to keep 1/3 of the profits of royal justice in the shire courts. Allowing earls to get rich is advantageous for the king, because it means that earls can use their economic power to ensure their earldoms are both well run and well defended. Additionally, earls oversee justice and legal punishments in their earldoms, giving them strong social powers to control and influence the people within them. Their final key power is military. Earls are able to raise an army in the king's name, both through the fyrd, which is a kind of conscription, and in that they are lords to many hundreds of thanes, lower landholding aristocracy. And as well, they also maintain an elite bodyguard of professional soldiers, known as housecarls. This means that the king often uses his earls like generals. They are the king's military leaders against his enemies. All these powers combined means that earls have economic, legal, and military control over their earldoms, giving the earls lots of power within the kingdom overall, as well as within their earldoms. There are, however, limits to the earls' powers, and they are not entirely independent of the king. They don't have the power to make new laws, they can't mint their own coins, or hold their own courts. In theory, they can also be sacked by the king. This can prove a little more tricky in practice for the king, though. How much these limits limit the earls depends very much on the king. Under strong kings like Cnut, the power of the earls is definitely less than that of the king. A powerful king such as Cnut demands obedience and punishes those who ignore or choose to go against him. However, not all kings are as strong, and Edward the Confessor is one of those less strong kings. Edward has spent most of his life in exile, meaning he does not have hundreds of important followers in England to back him. However, most importantly, the strength of a king is determined by the resources he has at his disposal, specifically how much land he controls. And Edward personally holds less land than Earl Godwin and his family, as well as having fewer personal followers than them, meaning that Earl Godwin and his family are able to have a lot of influence over Edward. The earls themselves rely on the support of their thanes within their earldoms. The thanes are essentially the most local level of aristocracy in England. They are large landholders with administrative and military responsibilities, to whom much of the everyday folk are directly tied, meaning that collectively the thanes can wield a lot of power. So it is very essential for earls to make sure that they have the support of their thanes. There are even occasions when thanes are able to demand that earls be removed from their positions, such as happens with Earl Tosti, one of Godwin's sons, in 1065. Finally, the earls are also able to exert their power through the Witan, a council which advises the king on issues of government, made up of the most important aristocrats in the kingdom, including both earls as well as other important noblemen, such as archbishops. The Witan meets regularly, and it discusses important topics such as military matters, religious affairs, and land disputes. It also plays a very important role in that it must elect and approve new kings. In theory, the king is free to ignore the Witan's advice if he wants to. However, in reality, doing this is a very bad idea, likely to create a lot of problems for the king, as he is likely to anger a lot of people, very powerful people, such as his earls, and he needs their support to be able to govern the kingdom. He also does not have enough military power of his own should his earls choose to turn against him, meaning that the king's own power is limited by that of his earls. 1016 to 1066, the power of the English earls. Thanks for watching, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell your friends. Sorry it's been a while since the last video. I moved country, started a master's degree, and then promptly ended up in hospital, and then I got into a fun dispute with the German authorities trying to get my residence permit. Thanks, Brexit. So I've been quite busy. That's my list of excuses anyway. In future, if you want updates on what I'm up to, how I'm doing, then you can find me on Blue Sky at alonglongtimeago.bsky.social. And if you like what I do enough that you want to help the channel financially, then I can be found on Patreon at patreon.com/alonglongtimeago. Any and all support is very much appreciated. Bye!